What's up, Scyushi Squad? We back in some more Trove, and today we're going to be focusing on not the Shadow Hunter. This is on the test server, so everything is subject to change. A lot of the numbers that I'm going to be throwing at you guys could potentially end up changing before this goes live. I would assume that this is going to end up going live either this coming week or the week after. Just an educated guess, just based off of what we've seen with the other reworks more recently. But here's the thing. If you guys have caught my other streams or even my other videos where we are deep diving into the Shadow Hunter, but we haven't really spent a specific video laser focused on the changes that are happening to all the other characters, because the majority of the classes in the game are all getting reworks along with the Shadow Hunter. Now, technically I could say that it's more of a rebalance, but for argument's sake, it's still basically a rework, because this update is single-handedly going to end up making some of your favorite classes viable. You will actually be able to use them. So we'll get into that. I'll have a timestamp so that you can see and skip into the YouTube chapters of any of the classes that you're interested in. When this update goes live, it means I'm gonna have my work cut out for me, because this update is going to end up making me have to redo a lot of my class build videos and a lot of my U10 and Delve videos with classes at 35 KPR and stuff. I usually show like them at the end game. But just before we end up getting into all of the side classes, I wanted to mention one brief thing that they did end up changing with the Shadow Hunter. We haven't seen any damage nerfs, so far that's actually awesome. But the one thing that they did end up changing is they made it so that the roll that gives you the movement speed boost, now every time you roll, it will actually refresh the movement speed boost. So that's actually awesome, because normally what would happen is you would roll, the effect would eventually go away, and then you had to wait a short while to end up reestablishing the buff, and then they ended up getting rid of that short internal cooldown, and now it just outright refreshes, which means you can just dodge till the heart's, dodge to your heart's content. So anyways, let's get into it. So first on the list is going to end up being the Boomeranger, a fan favorite character that people have been wanting a rework for a very, very long time now. These reworks that we're going to be talking about today are most of all just damage number changes, but they are still substantial enough that I would consider it a rework. Okay, so let's get right into it. So the bow's basic attack has been increased to 240%, up from 140%. This is taking in mind the most recent patch that's on the test server right now. Sword basic attack has increased to 270%, up from 170%. So that alone already really helps out the character, especially using the Boomeranger, as a bow character, because what you'll want to do on the Boomeranger right now is the blast bow is the best hidden effect that you can get on the Boomeranger. It kind of plays way too much VFX on the bow and arrow, but generally speaking is going to end up increasing your damage by an awful lot. So big bomb damage was increased to 75, whatever the heck that means. I guess just when you don't have the classroom ability, the big bomb itself has had an increase of damage, but I don't know why they're not just saying percentage values. I mean, generally speaking, no one uses big bomb anyways. Bach bomb damage, however, has had its damage increased to 800%, up from 285%. So that already is crazy. That means that, these minions are doing so much more damage now. That's 8 million, and I don't even have this character built up, by the way, like, just saying. Okay, so really cool that they ended up actually making Boomeranger kind of go back to form, because when the class gem abilities first got added to the game, Boomeranger was actually viable. It was a good class because a lot of its damage was from the Bach Bomb minions, and then for some reason it just got nerfed into the ground. So it's nice that Game Ago has been picking up the dumb decisions that Tryon Worlds ended up making with a lot of the classes, and it's really cool to end up having Boomeranger be completely viable just because of these slight changes to damage numbers. So they ended up fixing a bug where the minions summoned by Bach Bomb did not deal as much damage as the minions summoned by the Mysterious Urn. This is something that we ended up noticing and testing when we were playing this, playing on the test server day one on stream, where basically you would use your urn, and then the minions that would summon from that would do significantly more damage than the ones summoned from Bach Bomb. So it's nice that they ended up fixing that. Boomerang damage increased to 450 damage, or 450%, up from 275%. Mysterious Urn explosion damage increased to 800% up from 600%, and mini bombs summoned by the Mysterious Urn deal 650% up from 400%. The really big thing that the devs still haven't changed for some reason, I don't know if you're watching this, devs, but seriously, you need to change this. The problem with Boomeranger that still pertains even with all of these changes is he's got way too much knockback on his abilities. More particularly, if I could ever get the bombs to trigger from my urn, the bombs literally knock bosses off of their dungeons, and it just makes it really, really tedious to farm with this class. Knockback, I don't think, should be on any abilities in this game anymore, frankly, just because it's such an old, dated thing that is just like, you know, the time to kill enemies is the important thing, and you want to reduce that time to kill by having the enemies be close quarters with you so that you can output the most damage possible. But anyways, now the thing is, certain characters in today's video ended up getting a lot more highlighted than others, and I think that that's strongly to do with the characters that were very, very weak are now just much stronger. But moving on, we're going to be talking about the Fae Trickster, and this is going to be a very short one. So basic attack without ego boost active has increased to 300% up from 220%. Basic attack with ego boost active has increased to 650% up from 610%. So not a big change. Ego boost is basically the passive. So as long as you don't end up taking damage. I don't know why they call it, oh, ego boost. It's ego blast. So a little bit of a spell check there. But anyways, basically you end up not taking damage for a short while, and then yeah, it ends up basically making it so that maybe the class gem is changing the title of the thing, but anyways, it increases your damage. So the biggest thing is that glitter bomb damage has increased to 675% up from 450%. That's awesome, because the glitter bomb, frankly speaking, look at that. Look at that. I do not, like, I barely have this class built. You know, I'm just kind of rocking garbage gear as well as garbage gems, not optimal or anything like that. And we're doing 84 mil per explosion with our bombs, which already is amazing and actually makes Fae much more viable than it already was. Fae was always really, really good for single target damage, but now that we actually have these bombs doing way more damage, it means that Fae can clear dungeons. Hello. I mean, our base shots, as you can see, are doing 81 mil. Once again, I do not have this character built at all. I mean, my stats are okay, but woo, this character could hit hard if you end up changing it up. So they also increase the duration of ego boost debuff when hit to 4 up from 2. So basically, you could only end up getting hit twice, and then you would end up losing the ego blast or ego boost. I think that's because of the gem, right? Ego blast now requires an additional hit. Yeah, so I guess at its core, the base stat now, you can get hit twice, but when you have the class gem, it gives you 2 additional hits. So now you can get hit up to 4 total times before you end up losing that effective buff, which is really, really nice. Now moving on to the Ice Sage, we've had buffs and debuffs. So the basic attack damage was decreased to 225%, down from 275%, so not that big of a deal. Ice Crash, which is going to end up being your right click, damage has increased to 750%, up from 630, so at least now it's doing a lot more damage. I mean, once again, I do not have a very built Ice Sage, and already my right click is doing max damage. But I want to be very clear, the damage numbers that we're doing on these training dummies, they have absolutely no resistances whatsoever. So as soon as we would end up going to U10, that damage number would end up just dropping significantly. So don't get overwhelmed by seeing the damage numbers here. I'm just trying to, you know, show you guys that we are doing significantly more damage with these changes, which is very, very nice. So the Big Chill, which is your number 1 ability, has had the damage increased to 400% up from 315%. Not bad. The Gem Pain Freeze Explosion damage has been decreased to 625%, down from 750%. So that is a very significant debuff to the class gem explosive effect, which makes sense, honestly speaking. Ice Sage was really, really powerful, but I mean, at the same time, Did they need to nerf it? I don't know. I mean, that's a pretty big nerf, frankly speaking. So they also fixed a minor damage bug with the big crash. Overall, it's not like Ice Sage is any less viable. It's actually even more viable now. So moving on to the Candy Barb, these are probably some of my favorite changes just because Candy Barb became an absolute beast as the class deserved. So basic attack damage increased to 325%, up from 185%. They also slightly increased the attack size, so you can see I'm still damaging this guy from way the heck over here. That's like a 3 or 4 block gap between me and the enemy, which is absolutely awesome. Once again, I don't really have this guy super duper build up, and he's actually doing significant amounts of damage, which is great because now all of you that ended up maining Candy Barb, you know that the only reason you would end up maining him is just because of his ultimate ability, giving the attack speed boost to other classes, and then also just pulling enemies in for the sake of the party. But now you can actually hold your own and are finally able to do a significant enough amount of damage. So the vanilla swirlwind damage is increased to 700%, up from 650%, and the energy cost has been reduced to 55, down from 60. They also reduced the knockback of it. Sugar Crash, which is going to end up being our number 1, so the ability they were talking about right there, sorry, I should clarified, is our right click. So they changed that a little bit, made it so that it takes a lot less, which is great because there's the new ring effect where you basically just hold right click and spin to win. I think that's literally what the ability is called, although I don't have it on my Barb because I never had him built, because I never had the reason to. So Sugar Crash, which is our number 1 ability, damage increased to 650%, up from 450%, so that's pretty significant. Scoop and Gloop gem damage increased to 650%, up from 450%. So I guess the point is that the initial buff of damage, like both of these have had their buffs changed, but basically they're saying that if you don't have your class gem, your jump is going to end up doing a lot of damage, and now with the class gem, it's also going to end up doing significantly more damage. And then here's the other thing that really takes the cake, is the ultimate of the Candy Barb was always good, but Eris Crom Cone damage increased to 1,675%, up from 1,500%. So that's 175% damage increase on our ultimate alone, which is already insane because that ult always did a lot of damage. And then the Rage Candy, which is you know, the candy that you could end up triggering from fighting, and you know, the candy that constantly triggers with the Candy Barb. So Rage Candy gives increased movement speed and attack speed now, and additionally will also buff physical damage. It says physical damage specifically, rather than just attack percentage overall. So that's actually really, really cool, that you could end up actually using this guy to buff up your physical damage characters now. Now, you Neon Ninja mains are going to be freaking out because guess what? You already thought Neon Ninja was a god tier? Well, it got even stronger. I don't know why, but okay. So basic attack has had its damage increased to 285%, up from 100%. That's awesome. Stasis Blade, which is our number 1 ability, the dash, has had the damage increased to 450%, up from 250%, so that's almost double, which is crazy. Final Technique, which is your ultimate ability, increased its damage to 550%, up from 300%. Awesome that they're trying to make these other abilities more useful, but they also ended up changing the shurikens as well. So Shining Star damage, which is that's basically going to end up being your shurikens without the class gem. Okay, so Shining Star damage has had the first shuriken does 315% damage, up from 250%. The second shuriken does 475, up from 450, and then the third shuriken level is going to do 850%, up from 750. But nobody on this earth is going to end up using the Neon Ninja for endgame grinding or anything like that without the class gem ability. But don't worry, the class gem ability has also been buffed. Even though you could still, if you have a built up Neon Ninja, your ultimate, or not your ultimate, but your full 1, 2, 3 shuriken, that would actually already do max damage to enemies in U10. So it is now going to end up doing more. I mean, the thing is with Trove, max damage numbers displayed does not coincide with the amount of damage that you're actually outputting, because you can do more damage than the maximum number value that can be shown. But anyways, the Hex Star or Hack Star or whatever, the first Shuriken has had its damage increased to 275 up from 250. The second level is 475 up from 450, and then the third level is 1000% up from 950%. They also ended up reducing crit damage bonus on level 3, so it's kind of a, I don't know, it's balancing, right? It's like it ended up getting a little bit weaker, but the percentage value went up. So I think the big reason that they're making these slight adjustments in the way that the game ends up calculating these sorts of things is because they're getting us ready for like a big update that's coming that's going to end up adding new levels of difficulty to the game. It just would make the most sense, especially with the fact that so many characters are getting a significant increase to the amount of damage that they do, aside from the classes that got nerfed, and I have a lot of things to say about that, but we'll get into those in a minute. Now, you Knight mains are going to freak out, because here's the thing. I first of all want to say that the Knight has always been a class that you could main. Lots of people always dump on the Knight, and I think that the reason for it is most of all just because he's kind of boring, you know, in his character design, and then once you get the class gem, all you're really doing is just spamming your #1 attack over and over again. But generally speaking, it was always viable to use and ends up actually damaging very heavily on a lot of enemies, because the Knight has already had a couple reworks, and a very significant one like a year or two ago that ended up making it completely viable. But now it's going to be even better. So one big thing that they ended up doing was changing the retribution effect. So retribution is actually the passive ability that myself and others constantly forget about. Or maybe it's just me, I don't know. But basically, the way that this is going to end up working now is that every time the Knight takes damage, they will store up retribution that increases the damage of their next attack. So this can stack up to 3 times, dealing additional damage for each stack. So basically, if you end up getting tagged by an enemy 3 times, which is pretty often, then your next attack will end up doing increased damage. So basic attacks reduce target's outgoing damage by up to 10% as well, and additional attacks refresh this debuff. So now it's kind of an incentive to end up hitting enemies with your base attack a lot more often, just because that's going to end up being, I don't know, I mean, 10% damage decrease isn't that big of a deal, but maybe it'll end up helping with bosses that end up just slapping you so hard that you can't breathe. But frankly speaking, I don't know why they're still focused on these types of weird debuffs in the game, because every enemy basically one-shots you, because the end game of Trove is literally build it towards DPS, and that's it. There's like maybe 1 or 2 classes that can technically be played as a tank, but they're still going to be better as a DPS overall. So anyways, so movement speed when attacking has been increased, so now you can actually just, I don't know, your movement speed is a little bit better when you're doing your attacks in general. So basic attack damage has increased to 450% up from 250%. So now you will actually end up using your normal attack on enemies, which is nice. They buffed the basic attack damage after taking a hit to 700% up from 650 for the first hit, because remember, this goes up to a 3 hit value. And for getting hit twice, your attack bonus is going to be 925% up from 800. And then for the third hit, you're going to have your damage increased by 1,350 up from 1,100. Damage reduction of the passive was actually increased to 10% up from 5%, where we end up, you know, reducing the amount of damage an enemy ends up doing to players. By tagging them with their base attack. The smash damage, which is going to end up being your right click, has had the damage increased to 850% up from 600%. So that's already crazy, because that smash can actually do a lot of damage even in the live server right now, despite the fact that it's so slow is the reason we don't end up using it. Honestly, I'd like to see it if they changed it so that the smash attack would be affected by attack speed, so that the animation cycle could be nice and quick. That would actually be really, really cool. So duration of smashes taunt increased to 4.5 seconds up from 3, because technically speaking, when you do it, it's supposed to taunt all enemies so that they start attacking the Knight, but don't tell the devs that Trove doesn't, stuff like that doesn't really matter in Trove. You know, there's no actual tactics to the game. So charge damage increased to 650% up from 450%. The duration of charge's taunt was increased to 2 seconds, up from 1. The taunt or the charged attack is not this one, it's the one without your class gem ability. So, you know, generally speaking, if you're being a speed farmer with the knight, your number 1 being a dash can end up being quite useful, especially if it could end up defeating enemies, which it seems like now it might be able to do significant damage. Not to say that your class gem isn't going to out damage it like crazy, obviously. So Spirit Squire, which is your number 1 ability, already did insane amounts of damage to enemies, but now it does 850% damage, up from 800. The duration of Iron Will, which is your ultimate ability, now lasts for 12 seconds, up from 10. La-di-da. But damage reduction of Iron Will is increased to 25%, up from 10%. So that is not bad. That's more what I'm talking about. I mean, frankly speaking, I'd like to see it at 50%, because the way that it works is when you cast the ult, it puts a shield on your teammates, and then the knight will end up taking damage instead of those players taking damage to a certain degree, which, I mean, hey, 25% is still nice, but it's not super duper ideal for a character that you're probably going to be building towards a DPS rather than a tank anyways. Now moving on to the Vanguard, which a lot of you... I know lots of people are actually very unhappy with where the Vanguard stands right now. Vanguard can still end up being a very, very good speed farming character, but a lot of people draw comparisons between the Vanguard and the Bard, I think because they both end up using the same fist weapon. And Vanguard is in kind of a very weird place right now where it kind of feels like old Shadowhunter. And I don't necessarily mean that it's unviable or it's weak, but old Shadowhunter, basically you could take all of your gems and swap it to the Neon Ninja, and you would just be faster and stronger, which thankfully now has been rectified with the Shadowhunter rework. Vanguard is in a very weird place right now, because if you take all of your gear and swap it over to the Bard, Bard is faster and stronger. So they really need to find a happy medium so that the Vanguard can start shining again, I personally think anyways, because Bard is also a lot easier to end up going faster through dungeons with the movement speed buff rather than the Vanguard. But anyways, let's get into the actual changes. So melee damage has been increased to 385%, up from 300, and the third melee basic attack has had its damage increased to 450%, up from 400. So I mean, you're still hitting a lot harder with your base attacks, but that might have to be tweaked a little bit better. Like the funny thing is that on the first version of the test server, the Vanguard's damage was actually increased a lot more, and then they started to decrease it to the value that we're talking about today, which it might end up changing before this update goes live. They also ended up buffing the ranged basic attack damage to 280%, up from 240%. With the third range shot doing 450% damage versus 400, which that needs to go way up. Like, again, if anybody's watching this that has some sort of an influence with that, we all know that the ranged version, like, you know, ranged mode for Vanguard is kind of a joke, because it's just so weak and unreliable versus using melee mode that it just doesn't really matter. I mean, frankly speaking, I think that a lot of the ranged attacks in Trove could be rectified by being able to phase through enemies. Even with regards to the Shadowhunter right now, I think that one of the things that is still very weak on the class is the fact that you don't have your shots phase through enemies, but it kind of compensates by your other abilities now are able to defeat enemies much easier. Like your trap and stuff like that has area of effect, so you're basically using that to clear dungeons rather than your base attack on the shadow. Anyways, I'm talking about the Shadowhunter and I'm getting off topic here, but that's all they ended up changing with the Vanguard, which is not substantial enough to keep Vanguard in the loop. Not to say Vanguard's unviable. Vanguard is still an insanely powerful character and lots of fun, but Vanguard's in a very weird place right now. Now, Dino Tamer has also had a pretty significant buff to some of his weakest points, which is his base attack. This is not his damage when he's on his mount, but his base attack has had its increase to 250%, up from 100%, whereas the Dino Mount basic attack has had it increased to 275%, up from 250. Not a big deal. But the basic area of effect damage has been increased to 200%, up from 100%, which is crazy good, because Dino Tamer, basically the way you play this guy is you're always in your ultimate. that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to keep the uptime as much as possible. And this already does a lot of damage. And the splash effect always did a lot of damage as well. So to have that increased by 100% more damage is insane. Also, get a load of this. So if you guys didn't know that your snare, whoopsie daisy, your snare already does like insane amounts of damage. And in a lot of ways you could argue is where a lot of Dino Tamer's damage ends up coming from, because you basically put this snare on the ground and then it just absolutely decimates any of the enemies. But the clever snare damage has actually been increased to 350%, up from 200%. Let's go. Dino Mount Clever Snare, which this is, so there's the Clever Snare is like the default one, whereas when you're on the Dino Mount, it's going to end up being a different one. So this snare has had its damage increased to 475%, up from 425. So that's not as big of a change, but the fact that they're trying to make the class more viable when you're not in your mount is really, really nice. And most of all, I think it's going to be really good for people that are at the early game where you're not constantly spamming your ult yet. All Dino summons have also had their damage increased slightly. I mean, frankly speaking, if we're going to end up talking about the Dino Tamer summons, they suck. The way that Trove deals with summons in this game right now is pretty bad. You know, Dino Tamer's the worst of it, whereas Tomb Razor's okay, and Draco is really good as well. Well, Draco's really good, but just the functionality of them is pretty messed up, right? So personally, I'd feel that it would be way better if we could go to our ult, and then maybe our Dino Stomp would throw down all three of our babies or something, and then maybe rather than them slowly dissipating over time, they would either be up so long as they're alive, or maybe just make it so that they can't take damage and then they just despawn after a while, which I don't know. The dino babies are still kind of useless, but as of right now, I mean, I guess they still kind of serve their purpose, you know, but generally speaking, they just die too quickly and the damage output isn't worth the animation of throwing them down. Plus they get lost a lot when you're doing dungeons. So Pirate Captain has had a pretty substantial increase, which those of you that pirate main, I know there's not many of you, but Pirate is a very powerful character, okay? No question about it. It just requires a lot more input from the player. So you kind of are constantly spamming pots so that you can get your turrets up to the most optimal possible. But Pirate Captain has always been one of the heavier hitters in the game. It's just the fact that it takes so long for Pirate Captain and so many pots for him to get to the point where he's outputting super optimal damage meant that why would you use Pirate Captain over another character? But once you get to that point where the stars align, you can end up doing significant damage on this guy. But anyways, base attack has been increased to 200%, up from 150. First mate base attack, so that's going to end up being your right click little turrets. They've had their attack damage increased to 175%, up from 100%. The pretend pirate, which is going to end up being your number one, let me get some doubloons, so that right there has had its damage, area of effect damage more specifically, increased to 350%, up from 250%. So not really anything changed on the ult, which frankly speaking already does like a lot of damage anyways. Generally speaking, Pirate Captain can be mained, but frankly speaking, I still would like to see some slight tweaks to make it something that was a little bit more fun. Not to say that the class is not fun, but you know what I mean. Revenant has had some very, very slight tweaks. So they increased the base attack damage to 420%, up from 390, which is really, really good, because basically the way that you play this guy right now is you'll toggle on your number one and then use your base attack at the same time, and you want to have as much attack speed as possible on this guy. So the fact that they ended up just increasing your base attack damage means that Revenant became much more relevant. Not to say that it wasn't, because Revenant, despite the fact that you don't really see that many people maining him just because he's so fat and slow and chonky, does not mean that his damage output has always been bad, because frankly speaking, Revenant can be a pretty heavy hitter. They also ended up making it so that your Spirit Storm's overall damage has been increased, which is your ultimate. I think it's just the fact that it ticks a lot more often on enemies and stuff. I don't know. It just says they increase the Spirit Storm's overall damage without going into too much detail about it. Draco also got a buff, which I, frankly speaking, don't really understand because Draco was already super duper strong, but I mean, hey, whatever. Neon Ninja got a buff as well. So they increased Spitfire damage to 230% up from 200%, and the area of effect damage has been increased to 415%. No, up from 400%. So that's basically just going to be, you know, while you're tagging enemies, you got your right click. So that's going to end up having more damage dealt on it. Not that big of a deal, but hey, whatever. Burnt Offerings, which is the bomb itself, not your baby, is the explosion effect, the bang. That is going to end up having its damage increased to 500% up from 450. But the Burning Ward minions, that's this little guy right here, has had the basic attack increased to 100% up from 75%, which is crazy good because Draco was already really powerful and a great delve character just because the damage you end up doing was already pretty significant. But most of all, you have really good survivability on top of damage. So now that your minions have ended up getting a lot stronger, I mean, that already is just like, what? Like, what? That's, I don't know why, but hey, I'll take it. And just before we end up getting into the nerfs, we've got some slight tweaks to the Lunar Lancer as well, which is kind of odd, but I mean, hey, I'll take it. So they reduced the knock-up effect on the Lunar form's base attack. So when you end up going into your ultimate ability, you know, you do kind of the old-fashioned swing effect, but it would knock enemies up a little bit, and it was kind of annoying. So they reduced that, which is awesome. They also reduced knockback on Shadow Lancer's class gem minions, and also made some slight improvements to those minutes, it says. I don't know what that means, but I guess maybe they summon like more consistently for a longer period of time or something. I mean, frankly speaking, Lancer is just dope right now. Seriously a powerful class, seriously a fast class. But anyways, let's get into the nerfs. So just before we end up talking about the nerfs to these classes, I do want to summarize that we've got nerfs to Gunslinger, Chloromancer, and Tomb Raiser, and I don't really understand the reason why, because for those of you that ended up going through the rest of the change log today and didn't just skip to this part, a lot of characters that already were god tier are actually getting a buff, which makes me really question why these other classes ended up getting a nerf. So Gunslinger has the full charge shot bullet damage decreased to 325% down from 400%. The explosion damage was reduced to 275% down from 350%. So I think that's just the full right click charge attack. I don't know if that's necessarily talking about the class gem ability itself. Maybe it is, because the class gem kind of ends up using the charge attacks as well, but the fact still remains that all you would use Gunslinger for was its ult. So I feel like, on the other hand, they actually really needed to buff the base attack and the charge shots rather than nerf them, but hey, whatever. A partial charge shot explosion damage was reduced to 175% down from 200%, and then the basic attack was decreased to 120% down from 133%, which devs, I'm sorry, get it together. Gunslinger literally was just using its class gem ability. It was the only thing that was even useful about this character. I need to see those damage numbers increase, dog. Like, it just doesn't make any sense to me. So now let's talk about the Chloromancer nerfs, which are pretty significant. Again, the Chloromancer's goal in the game was that it ended up defeating bosses very well, and it's kind of the only little niched area that this class ended up fitting. More particularly with the green Gatling damage, which has been nerfed, and the damage has been decreased to 100% down from 160%, so that's 60% damage lower. Mini Bloom damage has been decreased to 400% down from 450. Mini Blooms have a lower chance to spawn. Now they spawn at 10% down from 20%, which that's, you know, they basically move them around. So there would be the trees that would grow up and then explode are now the 10% chance to drop, which is kind of weird, but hey, whatever. The big green Gatling, so this is when you end up using your ultimate ability and throwing one of these bad boys down. It would end up doing significant damage, but now it has had, ignore the fact that it's doing max damage because I have my Chloromancer completely built, and once again, these training dummies don't have any resistances, so the damage numbers are not accurate for something like in U10 or Delves or anything like that. But anyways, the big green Gatling damage has been decreased to 275% down from 380%, so that's over 100% damage down on that one alone, which is crazy. Whereas the big leafy lasher has had its damage decreased to 225% down from 250%. Disappointing for any Chloro mains out there. I mean, frankly speaking, I did do my due diligence. I did try it out. And even with these nerfs, I can still solo a Leviathan. It's not going to end up being as big a deal as it was before. And there are other characters that kind of keep up with Chloromancer now. Oh, and then the Boomeranger rework, which I don't understand why they ended up doing this, because I love Boomeranger. I always used it as my Delve class, just because it's so freaking powerful. But it also ended up working out where you could use Boomeranger, Draco, Ice Age. There's obviously other classes that would shine in the Delves, but those were generally the top three, if not Ice Age being the absolute best. But I just personally don't prefer Ice Age's gameplay. I like being lazy. I like having the survivability of Draco or Boomeranger, but with Boomeranger, I like the fact that I could rely on so many of my minions, because that's literally where you get all of your damage. So they had the Skeletals basic attack damage has been decreased to 200% down from 225. So that's a 25% damage decrease, which is kind of significant, but it's not as big of a deal as you would think, compared to the Grave Goliath's slam damage decreased to 1,375%, down from 1,500%. Now that slam doesn't happen often enough in the attack cycle, but when it did, it was like, oh, that's some big chongo damage. So now that they ended up nerfing that, it means that the average damage output of the Boomeranger is significantly less. Thankfully, they didn't touch anything in terms of the Boomeranger survivability, which is still going to end up being where the class shines significantly. Oh, good lord. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, ladies and gentlemen. That was a lengthier video than expected, right? I mean, I'll have timestamps for everything so that you can skip through it. And as mentioned previously, more than likely when this ends up going onto the live server, I'll have to have individual videos breaking down all of these. I didn't want to do that right now because obviously some of these class changes are very, very minor and not really worth talking about in an individual video that would be like, what, 1 minute long? I mean, maybe I could still end up doing that anyways, but I'm going to end up waiting for this update to end up going live because these numbers are constantly changing. So we might see some of this stuff fluctuate. As of right now, though, generally speaking, I love this update. I think that it's amazing. I love the fact that they made Shadowhunter something that is actually viable and in a lot of aspects of the game shines as like the top 3 class, which I think is awesome because Shadowhunter is my favorite class. And I'm not saying this because I'm completely biased, but Shadowhunter never got a rework, and it's really, really nice to just see the character get stepped up to a higher degree and actually be something that I can just main and have fun with, because that's the biggest thing, is they made Shadowhunter so much more fun. If you didn't think it was already fun enough, that's the crazy thing, right? Either way, it's awesome that they're doing this and has me thinking that they're more than likely, I've talked about this on stream, but I'm very, very suspicious that they're planning to have higher than U10 Uber worlds come to the game. At least that's what I would hope. I would hope we end up getting further Uber worlds. But either way, that's my 2 cents towards it. I don't know if they're actually planning to have anything added to the game. Who knows? It just would make sense. And I think that a lot of players are constantly hounding them to end up having higher Uber worlds for prime Uber worlds, because nobody likes the Delves, okay? There's like maybe 2 people that are like, Delves are my favorite. But those are literally the people that haven't gone into Delves hundreds of times and gotten completely bored with it. No offense. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. Really appreciate it. Smash like, sub for more. Buy the merch you want, support the channel, and have yourselves a wonderful day, ladies and gentlemen.